For 70 years, the Pennsylvania S1 claimed 6,550 horsepower, making it the most powerful steam locomotive ever built. But when its sister locomotive was finally tested in 1952, the results proved that number was physically impossible. How did a fake horsepower rating fool the entire railroad industry for 7 decades? The Pennsylvania Railroad S1 Duplex stands as one of the most beautiful and mysterious locomotives ever built. Unveiled at the 1939 New York World's Fair, this streamlined giant stretched 140 feet and weighed over 1 million pounds. Its Art Deco styling, designed by Raymond Loewy, made it look like it belonged in a science fiction magazine rather than on steel rails. But beauty wasn't what made the S1 legendary. It was a single number printed in every railroad journal, repeated in every history book, and carved into the imagination of every rail enthusiast for generations. 6,150 horsepower. That figure placed the S1 at the absolute pinnacle of steam locomotive performance, supposedly making it the most powerful passenger engine America had ever produced. The claim appeared everywhere. Baldwin Locomotive Works, the S1's builder, published it in their official specifications. Trade magazines repeated it without question. Even decades after the locomotive was scrapped in 1949, that horsepower rating remained gospel. Museums displayed the number on plaques. Documentaries cited it as fact. Model train boxes proudly advertised the S1's superior power. What made this number so believable was its source. Baldwin wasn't some backyard operation making wild claims. They were one of America's oldest and most respected locomotive builders, with a reputation built over a century of engineering excellence. If Baldwin said the S1 produced 60,250 horsepower, who would dare question it? The S1 operated for less than a decade, assigned to high-speed passenger service between Chicago and Crestline, Ohio. Crews reported it could reach speeds approaching 100 miles per hour, and some whispered it had touched 120 or even 140 miles on certain runs, though no official records confirmed these claims. The locomotive became shrouded in mystery, its brief operational life only adding to its mystique. By the time diesels took over in the early 1950s, the S1 was already gone, cut up for scrap without ceremony. No examples survived, no detailed performance logs were made public. All that remained was the legend, and that singular, spectacular number, 6,550 horsepower. For rail historians, the S1 represented the ultimate what-if of steam power. What if it had been given more time? What if the design had been refined? What if diesel hadn't arrived so quickly? The horsepower figure suggested that steam still had untapped potential, that the S1 had reached heights other locomotives could only dream of achieving. But legends built on numbers deserve scrutiny, and in the world of engineering, claims require evidence. The question nobody asked for. 70 years was simple but devastating. Where did that 6,550 horsepower figure actually come from? Understanding why the S1's horsepower claim matters requires understanding what horsepower actually measures in a steam locomotive. It's not just a marketing number or a theoretical calculation, it's a precise measurement of work performed over time, and in the railroad industry, that measurement happens in 2 distinct ways. Indicated horsepower represents the power generated inside the cylinders themselves, calculated from steam pressure, piston area, and stroke length. Engineers measure this by installing pressure gauges directly into the cylinder heads, creating indicator diagrams that show exactly how much force the steam applies throughout each piston stroke. This number tells you what's happening inside the engine, but it doesn't tell you what reaches the rails. Drawbar horsepower is what actually matters for moving trains. This measurement captures the power delivered at the point where the locomotive connects to its train, after accounting for all the internal friction, mechanical losses, and energy consumed by the locomotive's own weight and movement. To measure drawbar horsepower accurately, railroads used dynamometer cars, specialized vehicles equipped with precision instruments that recorded the exact pulling force and speed throughout an entire run. The difference between indicated and drawbar horsepower can be substantial. A typical steam locomotive loses 15 to 25% of its indicated power to internal friction, the weight of moving parts, and the mechanics of converting reciprocating piston motion into rotating wheel movement. High-speed locomotives, with their longer strokes and faster reciprocating masses, often lose even more. For the S1, Baldwin published the 6,550 horsepower figure without specifying whether it was indicated or drawbar horsepower. This ambiguity should have raised immediate red flags. Every legitimate locomotive test report carefully distinguished between the two measurements because mixing them up would be like comparing an engine's gross horsepower to its net output, a difference that can make or break performance claims. The math behind horsepower calculations is straightforward but unforgiving. To achieve 6,550 indicated horsepower, the S1's 4 cylinders, each 22 inches in diameter with a 26-inch stroke, would need to operate at sustained high steam pressures while turning the 84-inch driving wheels at extreme speeds. The boiler, rated at 300 pounds per square inch, would need to generate and deliver steam at a rate that pushed the boundaries of what 1940s metallurgy and boiler design could safely handle. To achieve 6,550 drawbar horsepower would require even more remarkable performance, demanding that the locomotive not only generate that power internally, but also transmit it through the running gear with unprecedented efficiency. No steam locomotive before or since has demonstrated such low mechanical losses at high speeds. The question becomes unavoidable. Did anyone actually measure the S1's power output, or was the number simply calculated on paper and assumed to be true? Digging through Baldwin's archives reveals something troubling about the S1's horsepower claim. Unlike other flagship locomotives, there's no official dynamometer test report, no performance bulletin with measured data, no engineer's certification of actual output under controlled conditions. The 6,550 horsepower figure appears in promotional materials and specification sheets, but the documentation trail stops there. This absence becomes more significant when compared to how other builders handled their premier locomotives. When Lima Locomotive Works built the Allegheny, they invited Chesapeake and Ohio Railway to conduct extensive dynamometer testing. The results were published, scrutinized, and verified by multiple independent observers. When Union Pacific showcased the big boy, they provided detailed performance data from actual mountain service, complete with tonnage ratings and gradient specifications. Baldwin's approach with the S1 was different. The locomotive debuted at the World's Fair as a showpiece, a symbol of American industrial might and futuristic design. The emphasis was on appearance and potential rather than proven capability. Press releases highlighted the streamlining, the duplex drive system, and the impressive horsepower claim, but they never explained how that horsepower was determined or under what conditions it was measured. Internal Baldwin correspondence from the late 1930s, now housed at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, reveals engineers discussing the S1's estimated performance and projected output based on cylinder volumes and boiler capacity. These are theoretical calculations, the kind engineers make during the design phase before a locomotive ever turns a wheel. In standard practice, these estimates would later be verified. Through actual testing, Pennsylvania Railroad's own maintenance records from the S1 service years paint a different picture than the promotional material suggested. The locomotive suffered from chronic slipping problems, particularly when starting heavy trains. The duplex drive system, which split the power between two sets of cylinders driving separate wheel sets, created synchronization issues that wasted energy. Crews reported that the S1 was fast but temperamental, requiring constant attention to maintain steam pressure and avoid damaging the running gear. What's more revealing is what Pennsylvania Railroad didn't do. They ordered only one S1 despite Baldwin's hopes for a production run. If the locomotive had truly delivered 6,550 horsepower in regular service, proving itself as the ultimate passenger hauler, the railroad would have ordered more. Instead, they commissioned a smaller, more conventional duplex design for their next locomotive order. The circumstantial evidence suggests the 6,550 horsepower figure was aspirational rather than actual, a number representing what Baldwin's engineers hoped the S1 might achieve under perfect conditions rather than what it actually delivered on Pennsylvania's rails. But circumstantial evidence isn't proof. The proof would come from an unexpected source. In 1944, Baldwin Locomotive Works completed another ambitious project, the Pennsylvania Railroad T1 duplex. Like the S1, it featured Raymond Loewy's streamlined styling and the same split-cylinder duplex drive arrangement. Unlike the S1, 52 T1s were built, making it possible to gather extensive performance data across years of service. The T1 was smaller than the S1, with slightly reduced boiler capacity and a more conservative design approach informed by lessons learned from the earlier prototype. Baldwin's specifications claimed the T1 could produce 6,110 indicated horsepower, a figure only marginally below the S1's claimed output despite the T1's smaller dimensions and lighter weight. Pennsylvania Railroad, having learned from the S1 service issues, decided to conduct proper testing on the T1 fleet. In 1952, they coupled dynamometer car number 29 behind T1 locomotive 5549 for a series of measured runs between Crestline and Chicago. The results were recorded, analyzed, and filed away in Pennsylvania Railroad's Engineering Department archives. The dynamometer data was clinical and precise. At maximum sustainable output, locomotive 5549 produced 5,010 indicated horsepower and 4,280 drawbar horsepower. These were respectable numbers, placing the T1 among the more powerful passenger locomotives in service. But they were nowhere near the 6,110 indicated horsepower Baldwin had claimed in the specifications. What made these measurements devastating for the S1's legacy was the mechanical similarity between the two locomotives. Both used the same duplex drive system. Both operated at 300 pounds per square inch boiler pressure. Both featured similar cylinder dimensions and valve gear arrangements. The primary difference was scale. The S1 was larger with a bigger boiler and greater weight. Engineering principles suggest that if the smaller T1 could only achieve 82% of its claimed indicated horsepower in actual testing, the larger S1 would face similar or worse efficiency losses. The S1's greater weight and longer wheelbase would create more internal friction. Its higher speeds would amplify the energy loss to reciprocating mass imbalance. Its experimental nature meant it likely operated less efficiently than the refined T1 design. Applying the T1's measured performance ratio to the S1 suggests the earlier locomotive probably achieved around 5,370 indicated horsepower at best, not 6,550. For drawbar horsepower, the number that actually mattered for moving trains, the S1 likely delivered somewhere between 4,500 and 4,800 horsepower under optimal conditions. These weren't bad numbers. They represented genuine power and capability. But they weren't revolutionary. They weren't record-breaking. They were simply good performance from a well-engineered but ultimately conventional high-speed passenger locomotive. The T1's honest measurements had inadvertently exposed the S1's inflated legend. Understanding why Baldwin published an inflated horsepower figure for the S1 requires examining the railroad industry's climate in the late 1930s. This wasn't malicious fraud. It was corporate optimism colliding with engineering reality during a period of intense technological transition and marketing competition. The 1939 World's Fair represented more than just an exhibition. It was America's attempt to project confidence and modernity during the final years of the Great Depression. Corporations competed to showcase futuristic visions and technological superiority. General Motors displayed its Futurama exhibit, imagining automated highways and streamlined cities. General Electric demonstrated television and fluorescent lighting. For Baldwin, the S1 was their statement piece, their proof that steam power still had a future. Baldwin faced mounting pressure from emerging diesel-electric technology. General Motors' electromotive division had introduced the FT freight locomotive in 1939, demonstrating that diesels could match steam's power while offering better reliability and lower operating costs. Baldwin needed the S1 to be spectacular, to be undeniably superior, to justify continued investment in steam development. The horsepower calculation likely originated in Baldwin's engineering department as a theoretical maximum based on cylinder displacement, boiler capacity, and optimistic assumptions about mechanical efficiency. In the rush to prepare promotional materials for the World's Fair, this theoretical number became a specification, and the specification became accepted fact. Nobody challenged it because everyone wanted to believe steam power could achieve such heights. Pennsylvania Railroad, Baldwin's customer and partner in the S1 project, had their own motivations for accepting the claimed performance. The railroad was investing heavily in its passenger services, competing against other eastern railroads for lucrative Chicago and New York traffic. Having the world's most powerful passenger locomotive, even if only on paper, provided marketing value and prestige. There's also the matter of measurement difficulty. Accurately testing a locomotive designed for sustained high-speed running requires extensive track time, specialized equipment, and perfect conditions. The S1 entered service just as World War II began, and wartime demands left little opportunity for leisurely performance testing. By the time the war ended, diesel technology had advanced so rapidly that comprehensive steam locomotive testing seemed pointless. Baldwin likely never imagined their promotional number would persist for 7 decades. They probably assumed that operational experience would eventually replace the theoretical claims with measured data. But the S1's early retirement and subsequent scrapping meant that correction never happened. The inflated figure, unchallenged and unverified, became historical fact. This wasn't unique to Baldwin or the S1. Throughout the steam era's final years, builders made increasingly ambitious claims as they fought to preserve their industry against diesel's advance. The S1's horsepower inflation was simply the most dramatic example of a widespread pattern, one that only became visible decades later when researchers compared promotional materials against actual test data. What the S1 actually accomplished in service tells a more interesting story than any inflated horsepower number could convey. Performance isn't just about peak power output, it's about reliability, versatility, and whether a machine can deliver its capabilities consistently when needed. Pennsylvania Railroad assigned the S1 to the Chicago Crestline route, a 281-mile stretch that demanded sustained high-speed running across relatively flat terrain. Contemporary crew reports describe a locomotive capable of maintaining 90 to 100 miles per hour with passenger consists of 12 to 14 cars, covering the route in under 4 hours when conditions allowed. The S1's real achievement wasn't theoretical horsepower, it was demonstrating that American builders could create a locomotive combining extreme size with genuine high-speed capability. Previous large locomotives were designed for heavy freight service at moderate speeds. The S1 showed that careful engineering could produce a machine that was both massive and fast, even if the execution revealed problems that would require further refinement. The duplex drive system, despite its synchronization issues, proved that splitting the power plant could reduce the hammer blow effect that damaged tracks at high speeds. Traditional single-expansion locomotives concentrated all their reciprocating mass in one location, creating destructive vertical forces. The S1's distributed drive spread these forces across 2 points, lessening track wear and allowing higher sustained speeds. Where the S1 struggled was in versatility. Its 84-inch driving wheels and high-speed gearing made it exceptional at one specific task, but mediocre at everything else. Starting heavy trains from a standstill tested the limits of its adhesion. Slower speed running was inefficient, burning excessive coal without delivering proportional performance. When wartime conditions demanded locomotives capable of handling varied assignments, the S1's specialization became a liability. The most telling measure of the S1's real-world performance came from Pennsylvania Railroad's subsequent locomotive orders. Instead of building more S1s, they commissioned the T1, which incorporated the S1's speed capabilities in a smaller, more practical package. Instead of pursuing maximum theoretical horsepower, they accepted slightly lower peak output in exchange for better starting power, reduced maintenance demands, and improved operational flexibility. Maintenance records reveal the S1 spent considerable time out of service for repairs, particularly to its complex valve gear and duplex drive components. While some of these issues stemmed from its experimental nature, they also reflected the inherent challenges of pushing steam technology toward its absolute limits. The theoretical horsepower came at a cost in mechanical complexity that Pennsylvania Railroad ultimately decided wasn't worth paying. In the end, the S1's legacy shouldn't rest on a fabricated number. Its real contribution was advancing high-speed locomotive design, demonstrating both the possibilities and the practical limits of late-era steam power. That's a more valuable lesson than any inflated horsepower claim could provide. The persistence of the S1's false horsepower claim reveals something fundamental about how technical history gets written and remembered. Numbers that sound impressive tend to survive in public memory, even when evidence contradicts them. The truth often loses to a better story. Today, mention the Pennsylvania S1 in any rail enthusiast forum, and someone will cite the 6,550 horsepower figure within minutes. Point out the lack of documentation, and you'll encounter resistance. The number has become part of the locomotive's identity, inseparable from its mystique. Correcting it feels like diminishing the S1's importance, even though the locomotive's real achievements stand on their own merit. This phenomenon extends beyond railroad history. Throughout engineering documentation, you'll find equipment specifications that represent aspirational performance rather than measured reality. Maximum theoretical output gets published as if it were typical operational capability. Best-case scenarios become accepted standards. Over time, the qualifiers and conditions disappear, leaving only the impressive number. What makes the S1 case particularly instructive is that the evidence contradicting the claim came from the same source that created it. Baldwin's own testing of the T1, a locomotive using the same fundamental technology, provided the data that exposed the S1's inflated specifications. Yet even this internal contradiction hasn't dislodged the myth from popular history. The railroad museums that display information about the S1, working from decades-old reference materials, continue to cite the 6,550 horsepower figure. Books published as recently as the 2010s repeat it without question. Model manufacturers still advertise it on their packaging. The correction exists in technical journals and specialized research papers, but it hasn't penetrated mainstream railroad history. Perhaps the lesson extends beyond locomotives and horsepower claims. In an era where information spreads instantly and persists indefinitely, distinguishing between measured fact and promotional optimism becomes increasingly critical. The tools for verification exist, scattered across archives and technical reports, but accessing them requires effort that most people won't invest. The S1 deserves to be remembered for what it actually was: an ambitious attempt to push steam locomotive technology toward its ultimate expression, revealing both remarkable capabilities and inherent limitations. Its streamlined beauty, its role in Pennsylvania Railroad's passenger service, and its influence on subsequent designs all merit recognition. The inflated horsepower claim adds nothing of value to this legacy. As digital archives make historical documents more accessible, researchers have opportunities to challenge long-accepted claims and correct the record. Whether those corrections change public perception depends on something that can't be measured or calculated. It depends on whether people value accuracy enough to abandon the comforting familiarity of a legendary number. What other facts do we accept without questioning their origin? And what would we discover if we actually looked for proof? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and give this video a like if you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.